On the eve of one of the bloodiest chapters of World War I, something utterly impossible began to unfold. Instead of gunfire, voices started rising over the battlefield. And for the first time in months, the night carried music. In a war that turned landscapes into mud and silence into fear, an unexpected gesture began to take shape. It didn't come from generals, treaties, or political orders. It emerged from the trenches, from exhausted, freezing men who could barely remember life beyond the sound of artillery. And that December, subtle signs started piercing the logic of war. Lights where only darkness should exist. Songs where only screams belonged. Hope appearing in the least hopeful place on earth. No one knew it yet, but these signs were building toward one of the most extraordinary moments ever recorded in modern conflict. An event so improbable that even today it feels closer to myth than history. A moment when enemies laid down their weapons not because they had to, but because for one day they simply chose not to kill. But what pushed starving, exhausted, traumatized soldiers toward such a choice? How did the first signals, the songs, the voices, the lights, emerge from the frost and the mud? And what truly happened when they finally stepped into no man's land, face to face with the men they were ordered to destroy? To understand how a spontaneous truce became possible in the middle of chaos, we need to go back to the brutal conditions that set the stage for this miracle. To understand the miracle of Christmas 1914, we must first understand the world that produced it. By December, the Western Front had transformed into a vast maze of trenches, wet, freezing channels carved into the earth. Life there was not simply uncomfortable, it was punishing. Rain soaked everything. Mud clung to boots like cement. Rats multiplied. Frostbite spread. And between the opposing lines lay no man's land, a grim gallery of abandoned equipment, severed tree limbs, and fallen soldiers who could not be recovered. After months of relentless fighting, exhaustion was universal. Many soldiers were spending their first Christmas away from home, surrounded not by family, but by the stench of decay and the constant threat of sudden death. Yet despite the misery, nations tried to inject fragments of holiday spirit into the front. The British sent tins of chocolate, tobacco, and greetings from the monarchy. German troops received pipes and cigarettes from the Kaiser. In France, thousands of bottles of wine were dispatched to the front lines, an attempt to remind the soldiers of home. These gifts were more than tokens. They were a lifeline to another world, a reminder of who they were before the uniforms. In hospitals behind the lines, nurses tried to maintain a sense of Christmas for wounded soldiers. Letters written during these days describe attempts to decorate rooms, sing hymns, and offer comfort. One singer performing near the front reportedly ended a concert with the line, "Peace to men on earth," a phrase that must have landed heavily on the ears of men who had seen little peace at all. As December 24th approached, something else began to happen along the trenches. Sound. German soldiers started singing carols into the icy air, familiar melodies rising above the battlefield. British troops, initially bewildered, began to answer. Soon, entire regiments were joining in, each side shouting greetings across the darkness. And then came the lights. Small fir trees, decorated and glowing with candles or lanterns, appeared above the German parapets. They stood there as if conjured from a holiday card and placed into the mud by mistake. For many Allied soldiers, it was the first moment of beauty they had witnessed in months. In those final hours before Christmas Day, the emotional atmosphere shifted. The anticipation was not coordinated, not commanded, not planned. It was simply a growing sense shared by thousands of men. Something different could happen here. In those final hours before Christmas Day, the emotional atmosphere shifted. The anticipation was not coordinated, not commanded, not planned. It was simply a growing sense shared by thousands of men. Something different could happen here. The stage for the Christmas truce had been set. On Christmas Eve, as cold mist clung to the ground, British soldiers noticed unusual movement in the German lines. Instead of rifle flashes, they saw warm flickers of candlelight, dozens of tiny flames rising one by one. The Christmas trees glowed softly, their light carrying across no man's land like an invitation. Then came the singing again, still knacked, Heilage knacked, the melody floated over the frozen waste. Some British soldiers joined softly at first, then louder. matching the tune with Silent Night. The harmonies met in the darkness, blending into a single shared voice. From the British side, calls echoed, "Do you want to meet?" From the German side, "Yes. You know shoot, we know shoot." It was madness. It was irresistible. A few soldiers risked raising their heads above the trench. No shots came. Hearts pounded. They shouted again. Laughter followed. Then came the moment that changed everything. One German soldier climbed out of his trench, slowly, deliberately, hands raised. He was unarmed. British rifles locked onto him. Every watching man knew that one gunshot could end the entire fragile peace. But none came. A British soldier followed. Then another. Soon, cautious figures began walking toward the center of no man's land, boots crunching over frost and debris. Every step felt like it might be the last, the line between courage and fatal error razor thin. Yet step by step, the distance closed. When they finally met, the first gestures were tentative. A nod, a smile, a handshake. History had just taken a breath. As more soldiers climbed out of their trenches, no man's land, a space normally reserved for terror, transformed into a place of curiosity, relief, and disbelief. British, German, and some French and Belgian troops gathered together among the shell holes and frozen mud. What began as a handshake became a wave of humanity. Cigarettes were exchanged. Rum was shared. Chocolate bars changed hands. One soldier offered a piece of cake his mother had sent. Another held out a tin of tobacco. A German officer presented a British private with a button from his uniform, a small token of goodwill. There were smiles, real ones, not the forced grimaces of trench endurance. Some soldiers laughed, awkwardly at first, then freely. They compared uniforms. They posed for photographs, standing arm in arm, their breath fogging in the air. All around them lay the evidence of war, shattered earth, broken weapons, splintered posts, and the bodies of the fallen. In this strange interlude, both sides agreed, silently or explicitly, to retrieve their dead. Soldiers who had been enemies hours earlier now worked together to bury the corpses, sometimes conducting joint ceremonies. For many, this was the most emotional moment, enemies paying respect to the men they had killed, standing side by side in prayer. Some soldiers swapped helmets or hats as souvenirs. Others traded sausages for puddings, buttons for badges, or addresses for letters they hoped to send after the war. For a brief moment, no man's land became something else entirely, a sanctuary carved out of chaos, a temporary island of humanity where war could not reach, that IT was an impossible sight, and yet it was happening across miles of front lines. Few aspects of the Christmas Truce have grown as iconic as the story of football matches played between enemy soldiers. Over the decades, the idea has taken on a mythic quality, a perfect symbol of peace breaking through destruction. For many years, historians struggled to confirm the details because accounts were scarce or contradictory. But some are eventually verified. In the Belgian village of Wolvergem, letters written by British soldiers Albert Wyatt and Frank Naden described a spontaneous game on Christmas Day. According to their accounts, men kicked a ball back and forth in no man's land, laughing and slipping in the frozen mud. It wasn't an organized match, no goals, no formal teams, but it was unmistakably football. Just a ball and a moment of joy. Another confirmed event occurred in Frelinghien, France, where British and German troops reportedly played with a leather ball produced from someone's kit. It was brief, messy, and full of cheers. Most parts of the front never saw a game. Many sectors were simply too dangerous. But the idea of football spread quickly in letters home and later in newspapers, becoming a symbol of the truce itself. Even if only a few real games occurred, the symbolism was powerful. Sport, play, and shared humanity breaking through the machinery of war. And so the morning of December 25, 1914, a morning that should have been defined by mud and misery, added one more layer to its extraordinary story. Men who had tried to kill each other simply kicking a ball between the lines. All along the front, moments unfolded that felt almost surreal. Soldiers took out photographs of their families and passed them across the lines, pointing at children, wives, sweethearts. Some exchanged addresses, promising to write when the war ended, as though they expected to meet again under kinder circumstances. Carols continued throughout the day. Groups formed circles, mixing languages, merging traditions. One hymn in particular, Silent Night / Still Nacht, became the unofficial anthem of the truce, sung in harmonies that rose above the ruins. Nurses behind the lines later wrote about the emotional weight of that day, about hearing soldiers sing phrases like "Peace to men on earth," with voices cracked by exhaustion. Even in war, beauty had found a way to surface. The truce did not end with a gunshot. It ended with time. By December 26th, officers began pressuring men to return to their positions. High command sent strict orders across the front. Some sectors that had never joined the truce continued fighting even on Christmas Day, a reminder that this moment of peace was not universal. Gradually, soldiers shook hands one last time, exchanged final words, and retreated to their trenches. The rifles returned to their posts. The silence dissolved. Within hours the war resumed, but something had changed, even if only for a day. The soldiers had seen another possibility. If the soldiers found hope in the truce, their commanders found only alarm. High-ranking officials in Britain, France, and Germany issued furious orders afterward, determined to prevent any repeat of the event. To them, fraternization threatened discipline, morale, and the very continuation of the war. Over the following years, as the conflict intensified and the brutality escalated, any possibility of another truce disappeared entirely. Machine guns, poison gas, and mass offensives hardened attitudes and made moments of shared humanity nearly impossible. Interestingly, accounts of the truce were not universally celebrated at the time. In Germany and France, many photographs and reports were suppressed, censored, or downplayed. To acknowledge the truce publicly risked suggesting weakness or disloyalty. Only in Britain did newspapers like the Daily Mirror publish stories about the fraternization in January 1915. Decades later, the event resurfaced, slowly transforming into a global symbol of peace, a reminder that even the deepest conflicts contain moments of humanity. The enduring power of the Christmas truce comes from its stark contrast. In the middle of one of the deadliest wars in history, men chose, without orders, without negotiation, to stop killing. It was spontaneous, unplanned, and born not from politics, but from simple human intuition. We do not want to fight today. It reveals a truth we often forget. Wars are fought by individuals, many of whom never wanted to be enemies in the first place. And so we are left with the question, if soldiers in 1914, surrounded by devastation, could choose peace even briefly, could such a moment happen today? The truce is a reminder of the agency hidden inside even the bleakest circumstances. A cigarette shared, a song sung across the dark, a small illuminated tree rising above the trenches. These gestures did not end the war, but they carved out a moment where humanity pushed back against inevitability. In the end, the Christmas truce stands not just as a historical event, but as a possibility, a glimpse of what can happen when ordinary people choose to see each other not as enemies, but as human beings.